Right, guys, we got some updates on the rather fishy Nicola Sturgeon versus Alex Salmond affair that should reach its climax in the next few days, and I must say I actually enjoy making these videos, but I do have to say, as bad as it is, I stand on the side of Alex Salmond in this case, because what the SNP have done against him is truly disgusting if you ask me, and should never be done to anyone in my opinion. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, let me tell you. But as most of you will know, Salmond dropped some golden truth bombs on Nicola Sturgeon's head, meaning she now has some serious allegations to answer for, with actual evidence being on Alex Salmond's side, so she's not got an easy task there. As I've said before, and many know, the witch hunt involved Sturgeon and co. using the Scottish government machine and its tentacles to bring down their former leader politically and criminally. This PR disaster for Sturgeon has cost us over £1 million and will likely cost us a lot more. And once again, this is thanks to Sturgeon, as Alex Salmond explained during his evidence, which I actually have a clip for. Here, take a look at it.
As well, you asked about cost. My total legal bill for everything, advice, it was £591,689.73. Recouped from the Scottish Government was £512,252. That, I don't know, I haven't worked out the percentage. It's a very, very high percentage. Normally, as you'll be aware, your percentage, what you recoup in costs, because this is not money for me, it's money for the legal bills and the court bills and all the other things, if you're taking out a petition, is much, much lower than that. It was at the very highest level. And the reason for that was, and this indeed was conceded by the government, as you heard in evidence, it was we had to go through a whole commission and diligence procedure to extract documentation. And I saw Paul Coquette, one of the government's lawyers, giving evidence to you, and very honestly, he came forward and said, that, in his view, that was unprecedented. He'd never heard of having to have a commission to extract documentation, but a commission we had to have, and without that commission, of course, we wouldn't have got the documentation, and the government would have been managed to hide it. And just to understand one last point, the government were prepared to go before the court and say there was no more documents, and that wasn't the fault of their counsel, because he apologised repeatedly at the commission and made it absolutely clear it was the fault of his client, i.e. the government. Those on which a duty of candour was placed had been withholding documentation, not just from the petitioner, myself, not just from the court, but from their own counsel, which can't happen very often and is a totally extraordinary position.
Pretty damning shit there, I think most of you would agree, and that's just a little part of what he actually said. It was a complete roasting, like most people have pointed out by now. I won't go into it too much here, because obviously I've got videos detailing evidence from other people like Craig Murray, so you can check them out if you want to and have not seen them already. Today we are literally going to deal with the fallout from Salmond's evidence and the hot water it has left old Fish Lips in. She must have been raging at Salmond exposing her corruption for all to see, so let's take a look at what actually happened. The Telegraph has the main points here, so we'll quickly check that out. We don't really care about the headline or the first bit of this write-up that much, as we already know what's going on. We want to go balls deep in the actual substance of it. It says, keeping quiet, the former minister acknowledged in his opening remarks had not hitherto been my normal policy. I said nothing, today that changes, he said. Over the next 6 hours, he set out a series of remarkable claims about what he described as a malicious plan against him, which he alleges was launched by his former SNP allies. Which, given the stuff that they had done, I'd said is more than alleges at this point, but we'll go with that because we don't know for sure. One thing we do know for sure, though, is Nicola Sturgeon's husband has to be in hot water at this point. In fact, I'm astonished that he's even still in post, especially when there are questions of whether he has perjured himself by giving evidence to the court and then changing it after the fact. You know, they actually did this under oath, and countless government officials have actually changed their statements after they've given them. I'm not sure how that's possible. If I was in a court giving that shit and then changing it a week later, I'd be arrested for perjury within about 10 minutes, I guarantee it. Now here we reach the first bit that says SNP Messages. These are the messages that were sent between people in the SNP trying to bring him down, or that is what is alleged anyway. Mr. Salmond has said he has evidence showing that senior figures in the SNP, including Nicola Sturgeons' husband, put pressure on and colluded with witnesses and constructed evidence against him. This is something that Craig Murray mentioned in these evidence and I've covered previously. The 66-year-old said that when he read a tranche of messages from senior party and Scottish government figures turned over to him as part of the disclosure process in his criminal trial, it was one of the most extraordinary and distressing days of his life. He has been threatened with persecution if he publishes them. However, while the witness session was ongoing, it was confirmed that a new legal order had been issued to the Crown Office to access the messages by parliamentary committee. Mr. Salmond suggested that if a legal order was served on his lawyers, he would quickly comply. In other words, literally telling them there, ask me for them and I will give them to you. Our legal team will get them out to you as soon as possible. Hopefully this has already been done, because obviously this was Friday afternoon, so I would expect the plans are in the works to make sure it's done, or at least it fucking should be. Obviously, the government should have just been giving these out, because every time they have to get a parliamentary committee to do this, it costs us a shitload of money. As you heard in the video earlier, that is why all of this crap has cost us so much money. It goes on, some messages have leaked into the public domain, including one from Peter Murrell, Mrs. Sturgeons' husband, and the SNP chief executive, who spoke of applying pressure to the police about the Salmond affair, which is something I covered in the evidence I've already gone over. Mr. Murrell has claimed the messages were out of character, had been misinterpreted, and that he had sent them because he was upset. Well, it can't be all three of them. I have to stop him right there. How can it be out of character, misinterpreted, and because he was upset? That doesn't make any sense. It's like he's saying it was a mistake by saying it was out of character, then he's saying it didn't happen by saying it's been misinterpreted, and then he's saying he was upset, therefore admitting he actually did it. What the fuck is going on there? It goes on, however, Mr. Salmond said there are many other messages and what they speak to is behaviour that I would never have countenanced from people I had known in some cases for 30 years. Because obviously you're surrounded by a bunch of snivelling shitweasels who will stab you in the back as soon as look at you. Let's be honest, this is politics at this point. I expect it would happen with any political party around the country. He added, in my opinion, there has been behaviour that has not just been about pressuring police, but pressuring witnesses, collusion with witnesses. We're talking about the construction of evidence because the police somehow thought to be inadequate in finding it themselves, something I have also covered before in my previous videos. Some of you might remember me mentioning the 400-odd interview police fishing operation that didn't find fuck all against him. Yeah, that's normal behaviour, I'm sure you would all agree. It finishes up with, Mr. Salmond alleges that figures including Mr. Murrell, Sue Riddick, the SNP's Chief Operating Officer, Liz Lloyd, Miss Sturgeons' Chief of Staff, and Ian McCann, the party's compliance officer, were involved in a deliberate, prolonged, malicious and concerted effort to damage his reputation and have him jailed. Now we go on to the April 2018 meeting. One of the main charges facing Sturgeon is that she lied to Holyrood about when she became aware that her predecessor was being investigated for sexual misconduct. She told MSPs as well as Scotland's top court that the first time she became aware of the probe was on April 2nd, 2018, when Mr. Salmond visited her at her Glasgow home to tell her about it. But Mr. Salmond says he knows for certain that Miss Sturgeon knew about it on at least the 29th of March 2018, as it was discussed at her meeting at her Holyrood office with former Chief of Staff Jeff Aberdeen. Miss Sturgeon has claimed she forgot about the earlier meeting and suggested it was opportunistic and casual. However, Mr. Salmond said it was a formal meeting and had been explicitly set up to talk about the investigation that he faced. The purpose of the meeting was to brief Nicola on what was happening and to make sure that the meeting on the 2nd of April was taking place. He said, I know that Nicola Sturgeon knew about the complaints process at the meeting of March 29th because I was told so by Jeff Aberdeen, who told her at the meeting arranged for that purpose. Whether she had any prior knowledge of it, I cannot say, but I know she knew about it on the 29th of March. Miss Sturgeon has denied misleading Parliament, but claims of forgetting the 2018 meeting is seen as one of the major holes in her story. She is sure to be asked about it when she appears before the committee next week. Which actually, if I've got the time, I might actually try and live stream, of course, if I'm able to do it. I don't know if I can. It's not like Parliament as far as I'm aware. I'll have to try and find out. It says, under the ministerial code, any minister who knowingly misleads Parliament is expected to resign, with opponents believing the controversy about what she knew and when could end her political career. And let's be honest, the shit that she's been up to should. And actually, aside from that, the piss-poor way that she's run Scotland should actually be a reason why she steps down. In fact, she should be fucking booted out. They shouldn't be allowed to resign. They should be sacked with disgrace. It finishes up with Miss Sturgeon also faces claims that she broke the code by failing to record the meetings in her ministerial diaries. So what's that, 3 breaches of code there going on at the moment? Fuck knows, I don't even know. You'll probably end up losing count by the end of it. But next up, we have the Crown Office itself. It says the actions of Scotland's prosecution service, the equivalent of the Crown Prosecution Service in England, came in for particularly harsh criticism from Mr. Salmond, who called for the law advocate, Scotland's top law officer, to resign. Because obviously it appears he's been involved in all this bullshit with Nicola Sturgeon and the rest of them. Of course, we don't know that for sure, but it would appear Alex Salmond actually has some evidence for this. He is certainly sure enough that he just rattled it all off as he was sitting there the other day. It says, in a remarkable submission highlighting his concerns over the strength and conduct of Scottish institutions, he said that while he wanted Scotland to be independent, he also wanted it to be somewhere with robust safeguards, where citizens were not subject to arbitrary authority. Kind of like what we've been living under for the last year now, and obviously what he's been dealing with for 2.5 years over this witch hunt. He revealed that he had been threatened by the Crown Office to limit the scope of his evidence and not speak about sections of his written submission already in the public domain. Because obviously that is what the Crown Office should be doing. Surely Parliament should be putting a stop to that straight away. But obviously it's the Scottish Government and the SNP together that are involved in this, including all of its tentacles, so maybe there is no chance of that. It says the body came in for major criticism this week when it put pressure on the Scottish Parliament to delete sections of Mr. Salmond's written evidence, which it obviously complied with. Once again, something you will never see in your life before now. The former minister said the idea the only place my evidence can't be discussed is in a parliamentary committee is direct opposite of what should be true. Parliamentary committees should actually be able to discuss things that cannot be discussed elsewhere, because of proper exercise of parliamentary privilege and the duty of members of Parliament. Which I guess is true. Let's be honest, an MP can practically say whatever they want in the Houses of Parliament and get away with it. You try to say the same thing there, you could well find yourself in a lot of shit. I'm not sure if the rules are exactly the same for the Scottish Puppet Parliament, but they could well be. And to be honest with you, at this point I don't much care. He goes on, it seems to be an extraordinary position and clearly something is wrong. Whether it's institutional or whether it's personal, as I suggest, is a matter for Parliament to decide, but clearly it's an intolerable situation and should not be allowed to continue. He also accused the Crown Office of misusing legislation passed by his government to further block the provision of evidence. He said the provision it relied upon was not passed by the Parliament to prevent a parliamentary inquiry getting to the truth on matters of the utmost public interest is being misused in its current context. He added, the application of these provisions and the threat of prosecution if I offer that evidence is in my estimation both extraordinary and unwarranted. Well, no shit, Sherlock there. This whole situation is extraordinary and unwarranted, I think most of you would agree. And we're finally approaching the last 2 bits. This one's going on for a little while, but it needs to be gone through properly. Let me tell you, you would rather this than sitting through the 6 hours of testimony that I have now watched twice at this point. And after finding this article, I kind of wish that I didn't, because they've literally covered everything that I would have covered in this video. Now we're going to have to look at the judicial review part. One of the committee's main tasks is looking at the circumstances around the judicial review Mr. Salmond brought against the government he once led. Mr. Salmond won the case with the judge ruling that the civil service probe into 2 complaints against him had been tainted by apparent bias. He was awarded more than £500,000 in legal costs, a bill met by the taxpayer, something we already see earlier. He claimed he knew the government had been told it was likely to lose the case months before it eventually conceded, something I've mentioned in previous videos. A failure to heed legal advice is another grounds on which he alleges Miss Sturgeon broke the ministerial code. So what's that, 3 or 4 at this point? I don't know, I'm feeling like Diane Abbott at the moment trying to count. He also alleged that the Scottish Government, knowing its case was in trouble, had deliberately sought to delay his civil case so that it could be paused and overtaken by the criminal investigation. He believes this was one of the motivations senior SNP figures had in seeking to promote a criminal case against him. Mr. Salmond said the description that is most commonly made in the press about the government's policy and what happened is botched. Your committee is examining, as I often said, the botched policy. The policy wasn't botched, the policy was unlawful, unfair, and tainted by apparent bias. Botched doesn't even cover it, which I would actually 100% agree with. It goes on, Mr. Salmond was investigated under a new policy drawn up by the Scottish Government in the wake of the Me Too movement. For the first time, it allowed former ministers to be investigated. Allies of the First Minister have claimed the policy was specifically designed to get him, something Miss Sturgeon and Leslie Evans, her chief mandarin, have always denied. Well, of course they fucking have. They ain't going to admit it, are they? Asked whether he accepted that the Me Too movement was the genesis of the procedure, he said, "I think it would be difficult to understand why out of the Me Too movement and the range of huge issues that were discussed in Parliament, if anyone thought or believed that out of that, what you absolutely required was a policy on former ministers, that strikes me as very, very difficult to believe." Next up, we have leaking, which is talking about leaking of people's names and also leaking shit to the press, which is not surprising for politics these days. Mr. Salmond alleges that the identity of a woman who accused him of sexual assault was passed to his former Chief of Staff by the Scottish Government. He said the woman's identity was shared with Jeff Aberdeen, who then passed the information on to him. The allegation is significant because as recently as Wednesday, Miss Sturgeon denied the claim at First Minister's questions. However, Mr. Salmond said that he could corroborate the allegation as 3 other people know that to be true, meaning he actually has witness evidence to prove he's shit. I wonder what the SNP are going to do about this. I'm sorry, reading through this so far only proves to me that Nicola Sturgeons needs to go, and she needs to go now. Surely just being accused of all this corruption here brings the Scottish Government into disrepute. You would think so anyway. I guarantee if it was the Tories doing this, you could bet your bollocks to a barn dance the SNP would be demanding they all step down. Jackie Bailey, a Labour member of the committee conducting the inquiry, said it had written to the 3 people for their version of events. Mr. Salmond also argued there should be a further police investigation into a leak to the Daily Record newspaper about complaints against him. He described how he was contacted on August 23, 2018 by the Scottish Government to inform him that a press statement would be issued at 5 p.m. that day, confirming the existence of an investigation into sexual misconduct complaints. Which is also something I covered when I went over Craig Murray's evidence. This was mentioned during his submission to the court. It says this plan was withdrawn after he threatened to apply to the courts for an interdict preventing the disclosure. Mr. Salmond told the committee, however, he said he was contacted by the Scottish Government at 4 p.m. to warn that the Daily Record had got wind of the investigation, and at 8 p.m. the newspaper asked him for comment. Mr. Salmond said the paper published a story the following day that included the same language as the Permanent Secretary's report on the inquiry, and argued it was clear it had even been passed a full document or an extract. A subsequent investigation by the Information Commissioner was sympathetic to the view that the criminal leak came from the Scottish Government, he said. Mr. Salmond insisted whoever did that, leaked the story, should answer for what is a very, very serious matter, which caused enormous distress and the implications that followed. And yeah, answering for it is definitely 100% true. Let's be honest, they should fucking be arrested. I'm pretty sure you're not allowed to start leaking people's details and shit like that. And obviously, if that was leaked by the Scottish Government, then even people in there need to be arrested 100%. What the fuck is going on? Now obviously, this is all pretty damning if it's true, and given the fact that most of it he says he has evidence for, I would suggest it probably is. He's ready to sit there and put his entire life on the line at this point. Now, though, we just have to wait to see what Nicola Sturgeon has to say for herself when she sits up there on Wednesday. I expect she will be squirming like a snivelling shitweasel, you can guarantee it. I look forward to seeing it. Even in this batshit crazy world, she should be saying goodbye to her job, her position, and her reputation. We can only hope that is what happens.